When we look at the economic outlook over the next few years, we're broadly fairly constructive. And so that is to say we do see some important tailwinds. And of course, central banks have been cutting rates, and there's a lagged benefit that accrues from that. And quite a number of countries are delivering fiscal stimulus, in some cases intentionally, in some cases as they build their militaries and so on. And so from that perspective, and larding on some artificial intelligence type productivity gains that we think are starting to appear, we do believe the next few years can be fairly good in an aggregate sense. Now, when comparing emerging markets to developed markets and acknowledging massive variation within each of those pools, we do think emerging markets can continue to outgrow, and from a market perspective, perhaps a fairly attractive place to be on the equity side as well. China is perhaps not in a perfect position right now. It's in fact stumbled a little bit recently, but we still think from a medium-term standpoint, there are exciting things happening there, including quite a lot of innovation going on, and so still constructive, even if growth may just be in the mid-fours for 2026. Just a small aside would be, quite remarkably, it does appear that sub-Saharan Africa is set to potentially outgrow much of Asia. And so that is not the normal state of affairs. And it does speak to the fact that a part of the world that maybe doesn't get its just attention is moving fairly quickly as well. And so just to flag that, even if many of those markets are still in the frontier as opposed to the emerging space. And then pivoting to the developed world, well, the US, we think, is becoming a bit less exceptional, but it is still seemingly on track for some pretty good growth and has some capital expenditures that are quite large coming from some of its hyperscalers and so on, but maybe a smaller lead versus many of the other developed peers. And so broadly, we think a lot of those tailwinds are relevant for many of the developed countries out there. We have reasonably positive outlooks for each of Japan and the Eurozone and also for the UK. And when we turn to Canada, obviously some challenges there, and there is still a lot of trade policy uncertainty. And similarly, we can say that without any real population growth, there is a certain cap on how fast you might realistically expect that economy to grow. But in the end, we think there's room for some acceleration over the second half of this year. And we believe in the end, it's an economy that can probably grow not too far from its potential over the next year.